Hello and welcome to this session on coping with change. My name's Alison Ainsworth. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm joined by three of my 1080 colleagues who I will just ask to introduce themselves. So Catherine, do you want to go first?
Yes, hi everyone. My name's Catherine Lambert. I'm a facilitator and executive coach. I often work with clients both individually and in a group setting to really support them through periods of change and uncertainty.
Thanks. Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Chris Thorne. I'm a 1080 executive and actually career coach as well, a facilitator, and I work with change as a bit of a specialist subject for me, and I mainly work to support people in transition, particularly emerging managers, and change is obviously a huge part of that process.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chris. I know it's a topic very close to your heart, so I'm looking forward to your comments. And Liz.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name's Liz Osland. I'm a 1080 coach, trainer and facilitator. And in the coaching space, I'm working with career coaching, outplacement, executive coaching and maternity coaching, all of which obviously people go through all sorts of different change and transition. And like Catherine and Chris, working at both individual and team level. So welcome everyone.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Just want to introduce the topic in terms of what we're going to be covering today, and very much thinking about change. I was going to upload a slide, but actually I think I'm going to talk over it. We're talking about change in terms of relation to career transition. Change is a huge topic. We could be talking about it for days, but we are going to refer to a couple of models that we use, and we can share the slide with you. The model of transition by William Bridges and the variation on the Kubler-Ross change curve. And I just want to point out, change and transition are two different things. Change is a situational event. It is something that happens to you. So either it is done to you in a situation where your career changes are not necessarily your choice, or you choose to make some changes to your career. Transition, however, is around the process. It's about the psychological adjustments that you need to go through in order to process the change that is happening to you. So that's where the element of choice and as we all referred to in terms of support, we need to think about as we go through any process of change. So that's very much the context of what we want to talk about today. So in terms of our first question, very much is around that process. So why is it important to take time to process that change? So I'm going to start with you, Liz, in terms of what, we had a conversation about this previously about, the importance of not knee-jerk reacting to change and taking time. So over to you.
Okay, so I'm actually speaking for the heart on this one, for me personally, but also working with clients. As you explained there, the change can be done to us, but we can also make choices that cause the change. But either way, there's such a fundamental shift that our mindset and mentality, we need to think about that and stop. And it can feel really uncomfortable, whatever that change is. And often we feel like we should be still being really busy, because the change when we're talking about careers is usually because either of a redundancy or we've chosen to leave a post. And it's likely you come from that being a million miles an hour and emails and projects and, work's all consuming. And all of a sudden there's this void and we feel like we need to be filling it and being really busy. And the danger with that is that we can really rush into making those decisions. And in terms of our mindset, as you said there, it's a knee-jerk. It's a very reactive mindset. And we want to try and move away from that to be a little bit more proactive, because if we're knee-jerking, reacting because we feel we want to be busy, we're not necessarily making our best decisions. And therefore, we might jump into an option that's available to us that actually isn't the best solution or option to us.
Yeah, there's lots of nodding going on there. As coaches, we're always trying to caution people against that. Catherine, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, absolutely agree with everything that Liz has just said there. And I think also it can be quite useful to think about the process and the psychological shift that's happening within us, because when we do experience times of change, it can feel like we have no control over that situation. And as human beings, we have a fundamental need for certainty. And so when we're unsure of something, the oldest parts of our brains kick in, and it essentially can trigger a threat response in us. And I'm sure a lot of us who are listening to this, and the four of us, know about the fight, flight, and fear and freeze response. And it can leave us incredibly overwhelmed in those situations where we're suddenly presented with something and we're unsure about, what the future might be or what happens next. And I think one thing that can be really helpful, and why it's important to take that time to process change, is to acknowledge the feelings and start to think about what's within our control, or the word that Liz used is choice, or if not within our control, at least within our influence, and try and focus on those things rather than the things that we have literally no control over. So, for example, a redundancy situation, which I have been in personally, I know some of us have also been. We might not be able to have control or change the decision that an organization has made that our role is going to be at risk. But we may have choices or be able to influence what happens next. So when I was in that situation, what I was able to do was step back and think about what it was that I wanted to do next. So really stop myself from doing that knee-jerk reaction that Liz just referred to, and almost use it as an opportunity to think, well, this could be a really nice opportunity for me to think about what that I want. And actually, for me, it was about, well, let's explore different choices, both inside the organization and outside of the organization, and just see where that takes me. And I think that was a really helpful way of me focusing in a proactive way rather than reactive, to start to try and shift my psychological process I was going through with it. And I think is a really helpful way of us just thinking about what we focus on as we go through that process of change.
I love those two words, choice and control. I think that when you recognize you have a choice, it might not be your choice to be in this position, but everything you do going forward is your choice. And the quicker you get back in control, the easier it is to process. So, yeah. And Chris, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I was going to say, and some incredible wisdom shared already with these two ladies. I'm obviously nodding my head in huge agreement. Yeah, I think what I would just add here is that, if you think about it, our whole life, we are going through change. Life is a process of several transitions, as we grow up, go through school, we start our work lives, etc. And, learning how to adapt and make sense of those changes is really key to how we shape our future. And every time we encounter a change, it's really an opportunity for us to sort of stop and think, okay, what does this change mean to me? What is it actually going to, how's it going to impact my life? Who do I want to become, or who do I want to be when I emerge on the other side of this transition? Because as we've already said, the change may not be your choice, but the transition absolutely is. And, I've noticed that when I can successfully encourage clients that actually they are worth, taking the time to sit down and get clear on their values, what's really important to them, what do they really need in that next role, what skills and strengths do they want to bring to bear, and which ones do they want to develop going forward. I've noticed that the more, it's like homing in on a target, the more clear we can get on what it is that they want and where they want to go, it's very interesting how then as they begin the job search process, I see that different resources and scenarios start to align up with that, because our brain, it focuses on what we tell it to focus on. So I'd highly encourage people to really use these times as an opportunity to really think about what it is that you want and who you want to be going forward.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. I think, that whole thing about purpose, without getting too deep, it's a great opportunity to consider what those words mean to us. Okay. I think we're going to build on some of that you've already mentioned there about what happens when we are faced with change. And certainly, we know for a fact that a majority of the population doesn't like change. I think Harvard statistics say that at least 40% of the population doesn't like it. 30% can just about cope with it, and 30% enjoy it, something around those levels. So what happens to us when we're faced with change? And you referred to a little bit to that, Chris, around that stress response, and I know Catherine mentioned it, but Chris, do you want to go in first on that one?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that what you were just saying there about those statistics, Allison, because I think what I often encounter with people in changes is, as we just said, that obviously we're going through change all the time. I think the key is that what we don't like about change is when we don't have a choice in it, or we don't have control over it. If we have a choice and we have control over that change, it's a very different story all of a sudden, isn't it? Because we do like a bit of variety and stimulation and novelty and those sorts of things. So it's thinking about how can we get back some of that control? Because one of the things that happens when we have that initial change is that it triggers that threat response. And anything new, it's seen as a threat until our brain decides otherwise. And that's a survival instinct. It's kept us safe for thousands and thousands of years. And of course, change can threaten us at a very primal level. It threatens our needs for not just certainty, but status, having control, a sense of belonging, feeling like I'm still part of the tribe, and fairness. Have I been treated equitably? And there's, as we've just said, there's a huge gamut of emotions that we need to work through. And if you look at the Bridges transition model, there's sort of 3 phases. And the first phase is that it's the ending of the status quo. And at that point, we're in what we'd call a denial phase. And that's when we need information, all the facts about the change, the who, what, why, when, where, and how. And of course, we need to process those emotions before we can go to the next stage, which is that acceptance, is where we start to kind of go, all right, okay, this is happening. What am I going to do about it? How can I put some plans in place to move forward from this change? And then, of course, once we have made the change, we're on the other side, we've committed to it. We got to think about how we're going to sustain it. What kind of habits and routines can we put in place to keep it going? And Liz, I know you had some great, you had a great example for us earlier when we were talking about this, when you were made redundant. What sort of routines and habits did you find helped you?
Yeah, so thanks, Chris. I've had lots of different career changes, actually, because the contract has ended, because funding has ended, because I've decided to relocate and rock up in a new country with a suitcase and no job. And I've also been made redundant. And reflecting on all of it, the one thing that helped me in that change was the control that I had over the structure of my day. Because, as I said, you've gone from busy to potentially nothing. And as Catherine and Chris yourselves have explained so well, this idea of what you're in control of and what you can influence. Yes, you can be proactive in your job search, absolutely, but there's still going to be a gap. And, we want to structure our day to fill a bit of that void. And for me, exercise, because I can be in control of that, has been my stability in all of those downtime to both help me with my health, but also with my self-care and mental health. So when I was made redundant, literally within 48 hours, I'd found a 30-day yoga challenge on the YouTube, and that was it. I was committed. And it's not massive, is it? But at least I had something every day that was for me, and it was a bit of a challenge, bit of a stretch. I committed to it. And it just kept my levels up and motivation, a bit of self-worth. So I think and I've done that with kayaking, swimming, all sorts of different things. So I think, it's finding what works for you to make you feel better. And it doesn't have to be anything complicated.
No, I think it's such a really important point, and I'm going to bring Catherine in on the self-care aspect. Is the balance between the job search, the personal and the professional. What are you doing with your time? And I think you have to balance out some of that time for you. Catherine, build on that for us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what can sometimes happen is that we feel like we should be busy. And as Liz was saying right at the beginning, we're coming out of what may be a really busy time or work, and then we sort of still want to fill all that time. And so sometimes that self-care bit is the thing that we almost stop doing, when in fact it's probably the time more than any that we need that structure. We need that benefits from a physical and mental health perspective. So I think it is just reiterating that sometimes what happens is we almost stop doing some of the things and healthy habits that are particularly important for us. And so trying to be aware of that and consciously make sure we do either set ourselves a goal or know the things that help and continue to do those even more so than before, I think can be really helpful. I think the other thing that can sometimes happen when we're faced with change is that we start to compare ourselves to others who perhaps are going through a change too, or have done in the past. And it can be a bit of a, well, they seem to be getting there much quicker than I am. They seem to have already got to acceptance and commitment. And actually, I'm still having a really tough time here. And that can put more pressure on us to start to go, well, you know, I need to be, or I must do. And so I think it's just about acknowledging to ourselves that this whole process is dynamic. It takes time, and we will go through it at the pace that we need to. And that might be sometimes that we think we've started to come out the other side of the curve, and actually something happens and it's a bit of a setback, and we feel like we've gone 2 to 3 steps back from where we were, and that can feel really disheartening. So acknowledging that there is no right or wrong way, that it is a process, that we will take the time that we need, and not to compare ourselves to others, I think is a really important part of self-care as well, and one that we perhaps won't notice that we're doing necessarily. So again, just being aware of that and thinking about, you know, if that is something I'm doing, how can I just get back to what's going to be really helpful for me and create healthy habits, I think is really important. So yeah, that's the only other thing I'd add, I think, to what was said before.
Yeah, I think you're right. That whole self-care piece is so important, and we do forget. I often say that to clients, you know, put yourself back in the center of your world. What do you need right now? I think it's a brilliant question, and I'm sure we all use similar techniques. Chris, did you want to jump in there?
I was going to say, yeah, just listening to Catherine, it reminded me of something I heard recently, which is, what is your transition superpower? So when you were talking about the comparing, because I've had a lot of experience with it myself and with clients, and that, you know, I've often heard, you know, don't compare your chapter 1 or 2 to someone's chapter 20. But when you think about the process that you go through, every time you go through a change, there's probably certain bits of that process that you find easier than others. So maybe you're able to kind of process the emotions a bit quicker and, you know, get on with it, as they say. Or maybe, you know, once you've gotten to that acceptance phase, you find it easier to sit down and break down, okay, right, what do I need to do? What actually is the plan? And, you know, lay out all the steps and all the little actions. Or maybe you're really good at, you know, keeping the actions going and the habits. And it's something that hadn't occurred to me as a question until I heard it recently, but I'd encourage people to think about, well, which part of that process do I find easiest, and how can I maybe lean into that? And I think, and especially with everything we've all been saying about, you know, having these habits and routines in place with a job search, we know you can't always control the outcomes. You can only control the inputs. You can control how many people you reach out to or have conversations with, or how you prepare for an interview. So focus on what you can control, focus on those inputs, and actually track them and measure them, because then you can have that little sense of progress, that you know you're chipping away at things, especially if things don't quite go according to plan. Then at least you know you just need to keep persisting. You're doing the right stuff, because it's very easy to lose sight of that and then fall into that comparison trap, like Catherine said.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we know how hard it is to go through a career change and this process, but none of this happens in isolation, does it? You know, we all have things that are happening in our personal lives. It depends where you are in your career, and all sorts of other factors that influence the speed at which you might go through a process. So yeah, being mindful of that and being patient with yourself. I think, you know, that whole self-care piece. And I think we'll build on that in terms of techniques to support yourself when going through change. And again, when we were talking about this before, ladies, we all had some particular favourites here. So can I come back to you, Catherine, on your favourite techniques to focus on when to support yourself going through change?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of my favorites is probably what would seem like the simplest, and we all do all the time, and that's about breath work and breathing. And I really can't emphasize enough about when you are in that process of feeling overwhelmed, or whatever the feelings that are coming up for you, just allowing yourself to breathe and focus on your breathing can really help you get back to balance. And I actually, when I was going through the redundancy situation myself, I was fortunate to have a career coach who also had a heart rate monitor with him. So he put that on me. And so you could see how spiky and jaggedy my heart rate was when I went into this conversation, because I was feeling stressed, whether I had acknowledged it to myself or not. And so he did a really simple breathing exercise with me, which was to breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 8, and do that for a couple of minutes. And you physically could see my heart start to be much more smooth, as you would expect a heart rate to do. And in doing so, it just allowed me to, as I say, get back to balance. And at that point, then I'm able to get more of a sense of what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and then start to go back to opening up those choices. So it's a really, really simple thing, but I do it in any situation. It might be just before you go into an interview. It could be just before we go live on a LinkedIn Live, whatever it is, but just breathing in for 4 and out for 8 can just start to help you to get back to balance. And then the only other thing I think is one of my favorite tips is around then just acknowledging some of those emotions. Because if you want to start to allow them to dissipate, one of the best things to do is actually acknowledge they're there and put a word or name to them. And I think of it a bit like a beach ball. If you think your beach ball is your emotions and you're pushing it underwater, you can do that for a period of time. But if you do let go, what happens? It all sort of comes out in quite a big burst. So therefore, just acknowledging those emotions, putting a word to them, a name to them, in itself will allow some space for them, and then often they start to dissipate. So breathing and acknowledging emotions for me are my 2 tips that I think are particularly important when we're going through change.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think they're 2 great tips. I think just even being able to get stuff, to vocalize it, get out of your head and onto paper. And you talked about control and choice before as well. And once you've got it out of your head, you can make a plan. Chris referred to that. You can actually start to plan things once it's out of your head. But when it's in there, it all feels very overwhelming. And I love that beach ball analogy. I can sense you, that the pressure of having to squash that into the water. Brilliant. Liz, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm going to take Catherine's and build on it, actually. Why don't you go breathing in nature? So what I mean by that is connecting with your environment. Wherever you live, there's going to be a local wood, a stream, a lake, a beach, a mountain. Get out of the concrete grey and walk or sit in nature. It's going to calm you. You can do Catherine's suggestion of breathing, and it's going to be, 10 times more beneficial when you're with the trees or the water. But there is also lots of science behind how our brains work when we change our environment. So yes, it's going to have a calming effect, but actually it probably helps us to be a little bit more creative in our thinking. So with your job search or your thinking around what's next, it might be that you get a little bit stuck in quite a traditional linear way of thinking, drawing on, well, this is what's worked in the past. And by sitting in nature or being in nature can really open up our minds to see things in different perspective. And you might be surprised, we get some of our best ideas when we're in a relaxed state, running, about to go to sleep. So we need to induce those calm moments, because it might just fire off that I never thought about this, or I didn't think this might be an option for me. So that's one thing. And then go back to Chris's thing around leaning into that transition of change, and some things you cope well with and some you don't. For me personally, it's the loss of connection with people. You're suddenly in your house. Most people are at work 9 till 6 or 9 to 5, whatever they're doing, and your people world suddenly shrinks. So again, think about how can you connect with people. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing stopping you still signing up to professional networking events to keep you stimulated that way. But again, getting creative with those networking opportunities. What is the locally in your environment that you were never able to go to before because you were working? You never, ever know what's going to be at the local, talk at your library or local networking event that's on that could lead to the next introduction for your next job. And also things like volunteering opportunities for you to connect. So for me personally, I've always gone to volunteering to help other people, because for me, the self-care part, that was the part that was missing. I was feeling the grief and loss of I'm not around people anymore, and I'm a people person. So threw myself into volunteering. So they're my suggestions. So Chris, what about for you?
Oh, Chris, you're on mute.
Bound to happen. I'd like to pick up on the conversation and the connection piece, because one of the things that we really strongly advocate here at 1080 is what we call a proactive approach to job searching. And what that really means is it's getting conversations with people. It's getting into networking. It's getting into what we call information interviews, which we've done other LinkedIn Lives on. Because what I often tell my career transition clients is that, the answers that you're trying to find and trying to figure out, they are not always up here. They are probably out there. And they're probably going to emerge in a conversation with somebody else. Because you don't know what you don't know. You don't know who knows who, and you don't know, who else they know. And having those conversations, I find it stimulates a lot of thinking. It opens up that creative thought process, like what Liz was saying, and definitely an advocate of the nature, because you never know when that idea is going to come to you. I'll guarantee it will come to you when you least expect it, and often as a result of a conversation with somebody else. So I'd highly encourage you to really rethink that job strategy approach and really think about how you can be engaging with other people, whether it's an event, whether it's an intentional meeting, even if it's a webinar, or even listening to a podcast online where you're getting fresh ideas, just getting that input. I find it can be really, really helpful, because you can really tend to get quite tunnel vision and quite focused on like one narrow view of what's possible, and actually engaging with other people really opens up that view and possibilities, and it really helps you to stay a lot more energized.
Yeah, perfect. A couple of comments coming in. One from Vashi. My go-to technique is box breathing. Yeah, box breathing, similar to what Catherine said. Rounds of box breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and hold for 4 is one technique. So, rounds of box breathing. If you are a meditation or a mindfulness practitioner, those are helpful techniques. And as to say, nobody knows you're doing it. So if you are going for an interview, you can sit in reception and quite comfortably doing your box breathing. And Sue also made the comment, breath work is such a powerful tool, but yeah, very simple and effective. So yeah, some great tips there, ladies.
And can I add, it's all free.
Yes, absolutely. Who knew it could be that simple? Yeah, but it's true, it does work. Yeah, and brilliant comment from Kate. Excellent point. The connection, you can foster potential. I think it's easy to forget about that. Kate has been on these sessions before. Is a mindfulness and meditation coach, stroke guru, who I do meditation with, Kate. So if you haven't come across a shameful plug for Kate there, thank you for that, and thank you for watching, Kate. So ladies, it comes to our last thing, which is kind of top tips. So where do we want to go in terms of our top tips? So top tips to leave us with. So Catherine, do you want to start with top tips?
Yes, I would certainly reiterate the points that have just come through in the comments as well, about that bit around focusing on your breathing whenever you're feeling like those feelings are overwhelming. I do the box breathing with my daughter actually when she's having difficulty going off to sleep. It is a really great other technique that can work. But that could be at any time for an interview, before an interview, if you're about to go into a meeting, and and as Alison says, you won't necessarily even it won't be obvious that you're doing it, but it can be really powerful. And then my second top tip is just around painting an optimistic picture of what your future will look like. And I call it bounded optimism. So how can you think about what is a realistic yet positive view of what the future will look like? And then just make sure that you stop along the way to look back and celebrate success, because it's very easy to feel like we're climbing a mountain and never actually stop, turn and look back down to see how far we've come. And I think that acknowledgement as we go along the way can be really motivating as well.
That links nicely to a comment that Michael has made about tell yourself if you do the right things, it will come. Yeah. If you build it, they will come. Yeah, I love that comment, Michael. Thank you for sharing. Liz, where do you want to go with your top tip?
So I think the first one is that thing around being proactive, because what we spiral on is that we don't have the control. So get back the control by making some decisions. If they're not right, that's fine. Then, alter your path and change as you go forward. And then the other one's a little bit of an oxymoron? Is that the word? Enjoy the uncertainty. I know probably a lot of people now are going, oh, what do you mean enjoy? But I really mean that. You're never going to get that time back. And yes, some of the parts will be painful, but a lot of it will be really valuable time for you to practice that self-care, do things that on your bucket list that you've never been able to do before, and not in the freneticness of being really busy, being able to think and do things in a different way. You'll never get that time back. So revel in that. Yeah. So Chris, you?
Yeah, I love what you, sorry, I love what you said about embrace that uncertainty. You know, it's how you want to name that emotion. You can name it as fear, or you can choose to rename it and go, oh, actually, this is a little bit exciting, because there's a little bit of possibility in uncertainty, isn't there always? So it is how we choose to look at it. So I guess my two quick ones would be, firstly, you know, face your fears, because sometimes we can imagine all sorts of crazy scenarios, and sometimes we go, right, well, what's the worst that could happen, you know, if I apply for this or I don't get it, or what? And obviously, but on the flip side, you know, what's the best that could happen? Because on the one hand, if we face our fears, you know, we've kind of pulled out the monster from under the bed. It doesn't seem quite so scary. We can manage it. But equally, don't forget to look at the possibility side. And I'd build on that to say my second tip would be challenge your assumptions, because oftentimes what I notice is that people will make a determination about the job market, this role, their skills, whatever, based on a few instances of something that's happened, or something they've heard, or one conversation, when actually there's a much broader view. Kind of goes back to the conversations point I made earlier. But you know, look at those assumptions and question them as to whether or not they are helpful or harmful, and hopefully choose ones that are going to be helpful.
Perfect. Liz, Michael agrees with you. Surf the wave. And yeah, I think that's a great finishing comment. So thank you very much, ladies. We've gone slightly over time. Apologies for that. Our next session is on the 3rd of June on the subject of AI and ATS with Dean. So again, a great topic that's very current for people's thinking. So thank you very much for today. Thank you for your useful insights, and we'll see you again in June.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.